My concern about kids learning in the virtual world so much is this is mainly kids 6 to 12 years old, is that they need to be in a social environment where they can develop, their independence, their self-confidence, their relationship with peers. Those are the actual basis of good academic learning.
Hi, I'm James Taylor, business creativity and innovation keynote speaker, and this is The Creative Life, a show dedicated to you, the creative. If you're looking for motivation, inspiration, and advice while at home, at work, or on your daily commute, then this show is for you. Each episode brings you a successful creative, whether that's an author, musician, entrepreneur, performer, designer, or thought leader. They'll share with you their journey, their successes, their failures, their creative process, and much, much more. You'll find show notes for this episode, as well as free training on creativity, over at jamestaylor.me. Enjoy this episode. Hey there, it's James Taylor, and I'm delighted today to have on the show Lyn Lesch. Lyn Lesch is the author of Intelligence in the Digital Age, How the Search for Something Larger May Be Imperiled. His book examines how our use of digital technologies may be affecting our mental capacities and emotional lives in ways that will make it increasingly difficult for people to explore the possibility of a larger, more expansive consciousness. It's my great pleasure to have Lyn with us today. So welcome, Lyn.
Hi, James. How are you?
Very well. And so share with us all what's happening in your world at the moment.
Well, my book, the reason I wrote the book, I ran a private progressive school for years in suburban Chicago, where my real focus was on what was going on inside young people while they were learning. That was my primary, what I was trying to do is focus on that even more than external results or the curriculum, et cetera. So I've had a real interest for years in people's internal lives. And when the whole internet thing came along, I began to see some things that began to bother me. How people seem less able because of this fragmented, jumpy, awareness that's on the internet that people get habituated to. They might become less able to follow the stream of their thoughts to a point of completion or read things to a point of completion. They get so used to jumping from one part of the internet to the other that this might become part of their own mental processes. And another thing is just how people are using Google as their brain's external hard drive. They're not going back and fishing information out of their memories and try to follow their own thoughts that led to certain memories. And so I'm afraid those thought and those networks of thought and those memories might begin to calcify over time where people lose access to them. And then of course there's a whole information overload where people's short-term memories are becoming flooded with so much information so quickly that it's hard for those short-term memories to pass that information and knowledge onto long-term memory, which is what we use to think intelligently and also to focus on our world, to pay attention to what's important and what's not important. So that information overload is affecting, not just our thought processes, but our attentions and our memories. And the final thing is just a concern with how, because people are staring into a plastic screen all day, apprehending a virtual image rather than having experiences more in the real world, the real life experiences, that shallower experience that you have just looking at a virtual image on your screen is going to become part of their normal lives when they go back out into the world. And particularly that concerns me with younger people too, who tend to use the internet. Well, maybe not so much, use the internet more than older people.
It's interesting just now, obviously we're seeing this, the time that we're going through at the moment with as we're recording this coronavirus, COVID-19. And I know a lot of my friends who've got younger children, they're having to homeschool for the first time. And a lot of that education is taking place with them watching online courses, online lessons, online teaching in some way, even if they didn't really kind of do that so much before. So when things start to become unlocked, what do you have? Because you work with a lot of teachers, a lot of children over your time running that school. Do you have a sense that, I know the parents will be very happy for have the kids going back and spending time with each other kids at school, but do you think that the children themselves, do you think they will be worried about kind of going back and spending that kind of time with other other children, other individuals? Do you think they'll kind of go into themselves, or do you think
No.
they may just go completely the other way and just say, actually, I want to kind of spend time hanging out because I'm so fed up going and sitting in front of the screen all day?
Well, I think the kids will love being back with other children. My concern about kids learning in the virtual world so much is this is mainly kids 6 to 12 years old, is that they need to be in a social environment where they can develop, their independence, their self-confidence, their relationship with peers. Those are the actual basis of good academic learning. And they don't, if they aren't in that sort of social environment where they can develop those more developmental skills, not only will they not be as healthy, but their learning isn't going to progress as well. I mean, children need to become independent, self-confident, know how to relate to other people, etc., to become more effective learners. So that's a real concern of mine, that if this virtual learning that's going on now becomes institutionalized, that the kids won't be in the sort of social environment which allows them to progress developmentally.
Now, I know people like Sir Ken Robinson, they've talked a lot about how it's like that schools, or some schools, can kill creativity, can knock creativity out of children, and when they kind of go into adult life, they kind of feel detached from that ability that they're kind of born with as well. What did you find in kind of I know you've written in terms of like around creative and teaching techniques, and obviously in this book as well. Did you notice what was happening to our children's creativity at schools because of some of these technologies?
Well, the biggest the biggest enemy of that, I think, even as much as the technologies, is this whole testing mania. That is just to have kids learn in order to get a test score. And that even though very young kids are going to be figuring it out very quickly, that they're learning in order to please people with this score, is the best way not only to kill creativity, but to create this sort of dulled experience in young people that allows them not to be as creative. Just this learning for a reason outside of what you're interested in, learning for some score, for some grade. I have a real concern about that. As far as the virtual learning, it can certainly be used effectively. One real effective use of it can be to connect kids with the world of work outside of school. That's, I think, is being done more and more. That's a great use of digital technologies. But like I said, I think that, people, especially young people in their formative years, is staring into a plastic screen much of the day, where their experience is not real life, it's virtual. That's got to have a dulling effect on them. And dulling somebody's emotive life is tailor-made for like killing their creativity.
And can you see when a lot of the parents, because obviously a lot of the parents you're kind of speaking with, they've kind of grown up with these technologies, they're kind of digital natives in that sense. And I remember there was a film a few years ago, and I'm trying to remember the name of it, when it talked about there was these 40-year-olds and then these 20-year-olds, and the 40-year-olds were into their their Apple devices and their digital stuff and everything, but the 20-year-olds were going back to vinyl and wanting to go completely analog and moleskin notebooks and things as well. So that generation of the 20s, they're obviously becoming parents now as well, these digital natives. Are you seeing them almost like really push against some types of digital technologies in the teaching of their children?
Not really, not so much. One thing I kind of see occasionally, which is kind of heartening, because I have a strong belief that reading a bound book is often superior than reading an ebook, because you're physically connected to the book you're reading. You can apprehend your place in the book. You have your hands on it and become more absorbed in it. I'm tending to see a little more like young people, the millennial generation is occasionally going back and reading a book. It's not so much as it used to be previously, just going to the e-reader or the cell phone to read something on. Yeah, that's interesting. The school I had, those were all millennial children. and some bright kids in that generation. And I just think a number of them are going to have the perspective to see, wait a second, I just don't want to calcify my brain by staring into this screen all day, and the need to go out into the world and communicate with other people. I hope my school helped them to do that, because it was such a social learning environment. I'm still somewhat dubious, because it's so institutionalized for people to have their cell phones and just use those constantly. And one thing that bothers me is when I'm out in public and I'll be sitting and waiting for my car to get fixed or whatever, and there'll be somebody or people be sitting there, and you can see it on their faces. As soon as they have some sort of troubling thought that's bothering them, they just pull out the phone as a virtual pacifier of sorts, rather than just stay with what's bothering them. I think that's so important, that people stay with the stream of their thoughts, even if it leads to certain conflicts, rather than just go to the phone. I think the phone is being used for people to escape, the complexities in their lives, because it's such a handy tool, and it's so addictive.
And it's interesting. I remember when living in kind of Silicon Valley area, and some of my friends who had younger children, and some of my friends who were working in the Facebooks and the Googles of this world, and they were very cognizant of how much screen time their children were having. And they were because obviously they were building these technologies, and they knew how addictive they were as well. And you've got a lot of that generation coming out now in terms of thought leaders, people like the Newport or Yuval Noah Harari, who talk about that we've essentially built a generation of addicts to these technologies as well, because this is much more addictive. And in years to come, we'll look at this generation as in the same way that maybe they got young kids smoking, and it was very difficult to get them off of this habit that they have.
Yeah, I've had the discussion, and this drives me crazy occasionally, where people will make the argument, well, it's just like television. People have to be weaned off of TV watching. It's not the same. Television, you're kind of pulled into a certain reality, like this personality, the news given to you this way. But the internet, you're pulled into how you think and how you learn, your very thought processes. It's a much more addictive, potentially dangerous kind of reality as your thoughts become, amalgamated into all the coding and the algorithms inside the virtual world. I think this is something that really, and this is one reason why I wrote my book, that really needs to be explored. What is this digital world, and how people are using their devices, doing to their streams of thought and their memories and their ability to take in information and attend to the world selectively and have a vibrant emotive life. All those things I think need to be investigated, because I'm convinced the internet is definitely having an effect on all those things. And it's a much more, I think, pervasive sort of technology than something like television.
Now, rather than maybe go from one extreme to the other and go to the Thoreau, find a Walden, a pond somewhere and kind of live. Most of us are not going to be able to do that. We have to live in this world. And I know, obviously I mentioned like Cal Newport, like digital minimalism and things like that. So what advice do you give to both adults and also maybe parents as well, who have got kids that are kind of been coming into this, in terms of how to ensure that they're building a bigger capacity outside of these technologies, and they're building an ability to concentrate for longer periods of time, to focus for longer periods, and to think in a deeper way?
Yeah, I would say, one thing is just make a point of following your thoughts wherever they lead. Get used again to taking your thoughts to a point of completion. And you're get used to reading longer passages, because those things are just being shortened and chopped up because of how we're being habituated by the internet. So that's one thing, is just make a point of following the stream of your thoughts. And something else I think is really valuable is when somebody goes on the internet and downloads some bit of information or knowledge, don't just jump to another bit of information. Pull away from the computer or the phone. Think about what you have just apprehended in the virtual world. Make it a part of your actual working memory. Consider it away from the internet, and you'll be able to, your working memory will become much stronger, and you'll be able to actually think more intelligently. But when you just jump from one piece of information to another, you take in very little, and your short-term memory just gets flooded, and then your long-term memory can't think as intelligently as it needs to. So I think that's one thing. When you apprehend some piece of information or knowledge virtually, get away from the virtual device and think about it in real time before you go back to the computer or the PC and go to the next piece of information. I mean, people unfortunately becoming so used to just jumping from one bit of information to the next nonstop, but unfortunately that's just not happening. I think that's just not a good thing. I would like to see people just really, the internet is a really valuable tool, but if it's used in a way that you still have full access to your cognitive capabilities as you're using it, that's just so important.
Because I guess what's been built into these technologies as well is the people that are obviously creating them, they realize that our brains have only evolved to a certain amount. There's
right,
in terms
yeah.
of those pain and pleasure responses, and things in the amygdala and things that are kind of going on in the brain all the time. They know, in the same way that food companies know that if we can boost the sugar and boost the fat and the salt, that we like it more because we are going from that's going to help me survive. But we're not in the Serengeti plains anymore.
Yeah.
We're in a different, but those things are very, very deep wide. So we kind of have to, in the same way that maybe companies are using to kind of trick our minds to do certain things, we have to kind of figure out our own little kind of coping mechanisms, our ability to not fall into some of these traps.
Yeah, I think one of the dangerous things is the little like sign with the thumbs up. People get addicted to wanting confirmation from other people, and it just pulls them right into internet addiction all the more to get that confirmation. And also, I think a really not great development about that is that because people want that sort of affirmation, that little thumbs up like sign from other people, they only go to search for information that confirms their own worldview because they want the little thumbs up, and they don't take time to see what else is out there of contrary views. People just get addicted to the fishing out people who have the same exact view as they do because it allows them to get to some place they want to get to much quicker than if they spend time looking around the web for contrary points of view. So the whole addictive knot grows even tighter as they're looking for only that information or knowledge that confirms their particular view to get the little thumbs up from somebody.
And when you were working in schools, did you start to see that have a very negative impact upon those children, either in terms of ability to concentrate for longer periods of time or to connect with the other children in their class?
Well, it was a while back that I closed my school, but that was right in the teeth of the whole AOL thing started, and I think because my environment was allowed for so much social interaction between the kids. They had freedom of movement throughout the day, and they had a hand in designing their own curriculum, and they didn't sit at desks. Somebody could work on the floor all day on a project because they were in this social environment that I think was much more attractive to them. Real life, other kids than being at the internet. They weren't as much. No, I don't think as much in my particular school, but I would think if somebody goes to a school where you got to raise your hand to speak and you're confined to a desk all day, that's just tailor-made for somebody wanting to just veg out on the internet to escape all that. That's just another concern of mine that kids just don't have the sort of freedom of movement younger children they need to have in a learning environment. It just drives me nuts when I see some documentary about education, supposedly some new progressive approach, and the kids are all sitting there immobile at desks, raising their hand to get permission from the teacher to speak. It's like I'm thinking like John Dewey wrote over 100 years ago about that's just not the way to go, and somehow people haven't learned, So, it depends what environment the kids are in. Like I said, because my school was such a social environment, certain kids would get addicted to wanting to get on the computer, but I think it's because the other kids in the school and what they were doing was so much more interesting to them. They didn't get as addicted. And I think that's one way schools might want to go to deal with internet addiction. Make your environment much more social. Let your kids move around. Let them design their learning program. Don't make them sit at desks all day long.
And in your own kind of creative journey that you have gone through, obviously you've written kind of multiple books now on kind of around this kind of topic. Can you tell us about a time when you worked on a creative project, you gave it your heart and your soul, but for whatever reason, it just didn't work out like you'd hoped? And more importantly, what was the lesson that you took from that experience?
Oh, yeah. It comes right to mind. The first book I wrote, Our Results-Driven Testing Culture, how it might dull young people's or compromise young people's experience. I had pages up past my kneecap that I just wrote and I wanted to make sure I said everything I needed to say, and it got way too convoluted, and I showed it to friends. I mean, this is just, Lesch is a little too thick here, and I just had to learn the lesson. It took me a while to learn is less is more. When you really want to say something, it's so true, especially with writing, less is more, and I learned to streamline the book, what I wanted to say, and I had to get over the impulse to want to say everything at once, and just streamline it to, like a good reporter, don't bury the lead, go right to what I want to say and say it, and don't get wordy. That was the lesson I learned from that. It's been invaluable, and I use that in this book. It's a much more pared down, even though it's a complicated subject, it's a much more pared down book because I've learned that less is more. And I intentionally made the book shorter. It's only like 120 pages because there's a lot to unpack in this book. And it's about consciousness and internet addiction, et cetera. And you don't want to launch some 400-page, diatribe on this sort of subject. Keep it short, and so people can focus on what you say. So, I remember that I had pages up past my kneecap that I was writing. I just hadn't learned that lesson. I just wanted to say everything. And no, you can't do that as a writer. You have to pare it down. So that was a really important lesson.
I remember there's a writer, and I'm trying to remember his name now, Pollock. He wrote a book called The Omnivore's Dilemma. And he wrote a big book, first of all, a real kind of thick book, all about this particular topic, which is about our diets. And then so many people came to him out, and it was a successful book, but so many people came out and said, listen, could you write like maybe a shorter version, something that I can just put in my pocket and carry around? So he wrote a second book, which was almost a compressed version of the book. And then even after that, some people, his editor and people came back to him and said, listen, what people would really love to know is just tell us the rules. Like what should we do and what shouldn't we do? So he wrote a third book, basically, which is do this and don't do that. Don't eat something that your grandmother wouldn't recognize. And it was just all about these simple rules because different people want to take in information in different ways as well. Tell us about maybe a key insight or a light bulb moment in your life and your own journey.
Well, like I said, I kind of alluded to it earlier. I had been thinking about, I've been thinking about developing a larger consciousness. I've been interested in that my whole life, a larger awareness beyond thought and memory, and how people might get to that. And, and I was sitting in I think it was a car dealership, and I started to see the people as soon as they got a complicated, conflicted look on their face, something was bothering them, they went right to the phone. And it just hit me. This whole internet thing could become a real enemy of people taking the whole interior journey inside themselves in search of something larger. I remember that it just really hit me sitting there. This is prima facie evidence of how this could happen. So that was a really important moment. And then I went back and did research on what internet addiction might be doing to people, to their interior lives and memories and thought processes, and wrote the book from that. But I can still remember sitting there, and those people, as soon as they get a worried look, whoops, out comes the cell phone. This is not a good development for people, for the world exploring their interior lives.
But I was just saying this, you're not, completely against the idea of these technologies. There's obviously, and you were mentioning things like the virtual learning. There's some obviously things that are very powerful there as well. Is there an online resource or a tool or a mobile app, for example, that you do find has a lot of value, has a value to you, and you think it can have value to other people?
Well, first of all, I think it isn't the technologies. I think there's such an important distinction. It isn't the technologies that's the problem. It's how people are using the technologies. that's a real distinction. I mean, a cell phone by itself isn't going to do the sort of damage we've been talking about. It's the addictive use of that technology that causes the problem. That's a real, I think, an important distinction. So yeah, a lot of technologies are great, but it's how people are using them. But as far as myself, I like Twitter a lot. And Twitter is still, yeah, it's being compromised because people kind of get into the blame game with other people. But it started out as a microblogging platform where people wanted to share information. And I think a lot of times it's still an information sharing platform. I've had a lot of contacts with people on Twitter, people I never would have been able to find before or get to know in writing my book. Really well-known people in the field who, will answer your direct messages or whatever. I think that's a really good technology. If people use it effectively, it's an information sharing technology. Facebook, not so much. That's just, to me, is more like it started out as a dating site. So it's kind of become it's okay. It's kind of sharing your family albums with people and your personal information. But on Twitter, I like because it's still, even though it's being, misused at times, it's still an information sharing platform where you can contact people. I've done a lot of contacting people in the field of education, well-known educators, and sharing ideas with them right on Twitter. So I like that platform a lot.
Yeah, a little while back we had Amanda Palmer on the show, the songwriter, and she talked about this idea of, she uses Twitter, she calls it like her second screening. So when she's writing a song or a poem or doing some type of creative work, she's almost using her community, and she'll ask things like, listen, I'm trying to say this, what would be an interesting word to use instead of this?
Yeah.
So she's just kind of putting questions out there for a community to almost like crowdsource thoughts and ideas to kind of open up her way that she thinks about a topic or a subject or a particular line as well. And I think that's quite an interesting way, I think, of using the power of something like Twitter as well.
Yeah, you can find people who are kind of going down the same road you are, and you see what they have to say, and then you contact them, and they send feedback back. That's just really great. And it's really interesting how you can use that at times. A couple of times I've watched kind of shows of mine that have been favorites on cable TV and watched maybe one of the reruns of the shows and been able to contact one of the actors that I've seen acting in the scenes, on Twitter while I'm watching the scene. That's just, I'm thinking, whoa, we really are living in a different world now.
And if you could recommend one book to our audience, not one of your own books, but a book by another author you think more people should be reading, more people should experience, and also one album or record, what would that book and that record be?
Right, sure. That's easy. Okay, the book would be Crime and Punishment by Dostoyevsky. Okay, I think Dostoyevsky is at one and the same time the greatest psychologist who ever wrote fiction, the greatest storyteller, the greatest development of character. I think that's just it's just an incredible book. I'll pick that up occasionally and read it. How could somebody have written this thing? And as far as, albums, it would be Bob Dylan's Highway 61 Revisited, one of his great apocalyptic albums from the mid-'60s. And also I love Bruce Springsteen's Darkness on the Edge of Town album. I think that album has so much heart and soul to it. As far as classical music, I love Beethoven's Ninth Symphony, Dvorak's New World Symphony, Bach's Brandenburg Concertos. That's incredible music. And hopefully classical music will always stay in the world.
And Lyn, I want you to imagine now you wake up tomorrow morning and you have to start from scratch. So you've got all the tools of your trade, all the knowledge that you've acquired over the years, but no one knows you and you know no one. What would you do? How would you restart things?
Well, I'm kind of doing it right now. I've just started working on a book about a larger holistic intelligence. I wrote an appendix in the back of my book for some of the qualities of intelligence might be compromised by the internet age. So I'm trying to formulate a holistic theory of intelligence that involves, attention, memory, a flow state that leads toward greater attention, developing a clearer internal picture of the world, a larger view of intelligence. And, the way I go about that, I just kind of stick my nose into it. I don't really, I wrote an outline, I think, but I don't use that much. I sit and I formulate an idea where I want to go. What's this about, the whole thing as a whole? And then I just started going to the first chapter. or I'm just starting with a chapter about a brief history of intelligence, where it's led over the years. And I think as long as you know where you're going as a writer, you really don't have to sit down and write. Some people need to do that, sit down and write the whole prepared outline. But I just sit and quietly with the image of what I want to do, or the idea about what I want to do, and let that kind of percolate where it's going to go. And then I just kind of stick my nose into it and start writing.
Well, Lyn Lesch, thank you so much for coming on the show today. Where is the best place for people to go and learn about your book, and also not just Intelligence in the Digital Age, but also some of your other writings as well?
Okay, they can go to my website, lynlesch.com, LYNLESCH, all small letters.com. They can get my books on Amazon. They can get them from my publisher, Rowman and Littlefield, or other services that sell books.
Well, Lyn, thank you so much for coming on today and sharing with us all about your creative life.
Thank you, James. I appreciate you having me on.
If you're interested in living a more creative life, then I'd love to invite you to join me as I share some of the most successful strategies and techniques that high-performing creatives use. I put them all together in a free downloadable ebook that you can get by going to jamestaylor.me. That's jamestaylor.me to get your free downloadable ebook on creativity.